Big welcome to the UFC, to the former Invicta strawweight champ. It's Gordina, little fat girl's what that nickname means, Emily Ducote. She's taking on a tricky fighter and a fellow former Invicta champ, albeit at atomweight, Jessica Penne. And when Jessica Penne came in off the Ultimate Fighter, she had a fight of the night and pretty well fight of the year against Randa Marcos years and years ago in 2014. And it's been a rocky road for Penne.
What were you doing in 2014?
I was in university. I was switching from chemical engineering to business, Matt.
I was in grade 10. Just to put it out there, it's been a very long time. That's all.
It's been a minute. But when you do look at this fight, I mean, for Penne, she had the win streak. She fought Joanna Jędrzejczyk. She got her face beat in, melted like a stick of butter in July. And then after that, had to pick up the pieces. And by picking up the pieces, she took about a year off, got finished by Jessica Andrade, then went out and lost the fight where, listen, you think, hey, maybe she's going to beat Danielle Taylor. Both these women have fought Danielle Taylor. One of them knocked him out in a highlight reel, but it wasn't Jessica Penne. So Penne loses to Taylor, and then she goes through a bit of a dark abyss of a USADA issue, we'll call it. And she's off for years and years, about 4.5 years. And when Jessica Penne, there were rumblings that she was going to come back into the UFC, into active competition, it was like, okay, we have to temper our expectations a little bit, because for Penne, great strikes from the long range, not a lot of head movement, little bit of power, but when it comes to it, she gets her bread buttered with her ground game. I mean, you did see that in her last fight, taking on Karolina Kowalkiewicz. She's baiting her to the ground, and then Karolina goes, well, that looks like fun, I want that. And then, yeah, she got submitted quickly and easily by Penne with her premier submission. But when you look at Penne's fight back, I mean, she took on a fighter in Lupita Godinez, who was making her UFC debut, and it was one of those ones where Godinez, also a champion from a different organization, also good boxing, good on the ground, good with the wrestling. And in that fight, we got a little bit of a non-starter, but I think a lot of people have been a little bit more excited about Penne, just considering this is an older fighter, 4.5 years off. Now she's won 2 in a row, and she did look very good her last time out.
She did look really good her last time out, but I'm going to push back against one thing that you said. I don't think Jessica Penne is a good striker whatsoever, and I don't really think she does have pop at the end of her strikes. She does like to walk almost like a Sean Strickland walking forwards with Alex Pereira. That was always the thing that stood out to me when she fought Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Like, hey, was there a coach that really sat her down and said, you know what's a great idea? Let's walk forwards with our hands down by our waist and just accept damage the whole entire time? Because that was her game plan, and other than a few outside kicks from the outside, I really don't think Penne can do that much striking-wise with a lot of opponents at the UFC level. She's not a fighter who accepts other fighters closing the distance well on her, because she doesn't have great punching power. So, if you are someone like Emily Ducote, not that she's this like Jessica Andrade powerhouse, but there is a way to have success against Penne. If you get on the inside, you can make it uncomfortable for her, but it is a very fine line, because if you get too far on the inside, that's when she is able to use some of her judo. She's a very tall fighter for this division, so she does do a very good job of wrapping up a fighter, even on the back foot. The issue is, though, she leaves her chin very exposed when she does go for some of these clinch works, and that's something I've always worried about. I mean, Jessica Andrade is one fighter to be able to take advantage of it, but that's just a hole that keeps on showing up, whether she's taking the time off or not, and that's just something that I don't really think she's going to be able to fix no matter what stage of her career that she's at. I just look at Penne, and it's a very stifling game. I don't really look at her and think, okay,
who's Penne?
Jessica Penne, sorry. Jessica Penne is someone who can go out there, and it's more how does she negate the other fighters' positives. And in a fight against Emily Ducote, I think she can clinch her up really well, and I do think that her ground control will be a really important part of this fight. I'm just curious to see if Penne can stay active enough to deal with Ducote on the feet.
That's it. When you look at Jessica Penne, she's got good length, she's got a decent amount of pop at the end of her shots, but where I was going with her striking is, offensively, it's not so bad. It's lowish output. Like, you look at it throughout her UFC tenure, 10 UFC fights, 2.41 significant strikes per minute. UFC average is 3.38, so she's below average in what she's throwing out. And her defensive numbers are skewed because she got the tar beat out of her in the Andrade fight and the fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. But still those same holes in Penne's game, to the fact that she holds her hands low, about chest height, and she holds her head up and out like a lot of taller fighters will do in these divisions. So we flip the script and we talk about Emily Ducote, and you figure this is a fighter that way back when she was fighting with Bellator as a very young fighter. Obviously, she has 2 losses, one against Ilima-Lei Macfarlane very early on. It's her 3rd fight with Bellator, and that one was for nothing. It was just for fun. But if you do focus on it, she did have a title shot after that. Got armbarred in that fight. Lost the decision the first time she fought Ilima-Lei Macfarlane. Then she goes on to lose split decision to Christina Williams, the Warhorse. And then she loses to Vida Ortega. And at that point, Emily Ducote is a fighter that's 6-5 in her overall career, and it's really hard to tell what kind of a career trajectory she's going to take. I mean, this is a fighter that's really set herself up well at Oklahoma City, at American Top Team. She's somebody that I've seen feature prominently in a lot of different fighters' camps, but when you do look at it for Emily Ducote, I mean, great boxing. And I know she recently, I think it was 7 weeks ago on her Instagram, she just got her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and that's great to see, but that's kind of the last piece of her game that we really do see, because if you watch these fights out of Emily Ducote, and I should mention, 6-5 at a point, she goes on to beat Catherine Paprocki, submits Janesha Moranjan, former title challenger over with Invicta. She fights Kanako Murata, and in that fight, really the only thing I could say, and the only way that you can see a fighter beating somebody like Emily Ducote is if you try again and again and again to take her down. She has great defensive hips. She has a great first move, but for Kanako Murata, that was it. It was just chaining takedowns together, really, really throwing the kitchen sink at her with her grappling, and that's how Murata got the win. But after that, a win over Juliana Lima in a close enough fight where Lima won the first round, and then old lady Lima started to slow down round 2, round 3 against Danielle Taylor. If you've never seen that knockout, like, it is very nice. Heavy right hand. Taylor's knocked out standing, and then the referee doesn't jump in, so Ducote throws a head kick that drops Taylor and completely knocks her out. And then against Alicia Zappitella, that was a weird fight because Ducote won the belt to beat Danielle Taylor, and then Alicia Zappitella had just lost her atomweight belt, so off a loss, Zappitella gets a fight up at strawweight, and if you look at Zappitella, she's 4'11".
I felt like that was a step back in competition, if we are being completely honest.
Zappitella is a very good grappler when she's in her own positions, and she is at atomweight, but at strawweight at 4'11", she just, if you've ever seen a Zappitella fight, it's a lot of looping shots, it's a lot of trying to close the distance, get the takedown, and in that one, Ducote, very measured with her strikes, great jab, great 1-2, really good at throwing selective leg kicks, but she's not a big kicker, and when you boil it down for Ducote, her best path to victory is just staying measured, throwing those basic boxing combinations, and really pressuring your opponent to wait until they make a mistake.
I don't think Jessica Penne can strike with Emily Ducote whatsoever in this fight. If Penne's going to have success, she's going to have to be very clinch heavy. Now, she's not going to have to get her own takedowns based off all those clinches, but I really do think that's going to be her X factor position throughout this fight, because again, other than some lazy kicks to the body, there's no consequences for striking with Jessica Penne. You can get on the inside, you can land your own strikes, because again, her punches come from her hips, but there's no power behind them because her feet are never set when she strikes. The good thing about Ducote is at least she does set her feet when she strikes, because it allows her to go in for the takedown if she wants to go for it. It allows her to mix in her own kicks if she wants to. I just think this fight really comes down to look at Ducote more as like a striker and look at Pena more as a grappler, because I don't know how much success Emily can have on the mat with Penne, especially if she finds herself underneath, but I do think her takedown defense is good enough to at least keep this fight at range in the middle of the cage. And it's not like I think Penne's going to go on to just lose a bunch of fights. Like, she has looked better in her last 2 performances. It's just, this isn't the same fighter who was on The Ultimate Fighter, who people thought was going to challenge for the title. I think she does seem, not washed because that's too extreme of a term, I just don't think she's in her prime anymore, because it has been a really long time since she was that great Invicta fighter who had the wild fight with Michelle Waterson that a lot of people remember her for. So I do like Emily Ducote in this matchup, but I am curious to see if Penne can go on sort of a second career run.
Both fighters, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts, obviously for Penne, she's had hers for quite a long time, training out of Alliance and the respective close by gyms. This fight was originally announced June 2nd. It was supposed to be Jessica Penne against Brianna Fortino, formerly Van Buren, but Ducote steps in on short notice. You look at the odds in this one, Penne opened a plus 115, still roughly there. Emily Ducote opened a minus 135, minus 140, or thereabouts. We have a look at the Tapology votes, and listen, I'm going to say it's not a surprise to us, but it will be to you, Matt. It is a surprise to us. I'm going to say over under 70% for the younger fighter.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say over. No, it's slightly under. 621 total votes. 63% for Emily Ducote. 72% by decision. 21% by knockout. For the 37% that have Penne, 75% by decision. And 13% by submission. You've already made your pick. You're on with Jessica Penne.
Penne's not a great striker. I'm sorry. She doesn't put volume together, and she doesn't have great power power. If you don't have great power, but you have great volume, you can still outstrike yourself in a lot of situations, or outstrike your opponent, I should say. For Pena, it's a lot of be on the back foot, hope that you wrap them up in the clinch, and hope that you drag them down to the ground. Her takedowns aren't traditional, and I don't mean that in a positive way. Like, Alexander Romanov's takedowns aren't traditional, but they're very, very good because they're unique to him. For Penne, it is a lot of hope that she gets that head and arm throw, hope that she can get on top with that, and I do think Ducote's a good enough grappler to where if she does find herself in one of those head and arm throws, I think she'll be able to scramble out the back door from that position a lot, because I don't think Penne's solid enough in the top position to just keep on going back to that over and over and over again. Now, UFC Octagon jitters, we should talk about that, but the good thing is, Ducote's fought in some pretty big organizations throughout her career, so I'm not really worried about her coming over and, you know, the big lights being too much for her. Like you had said, fought for the title against Ilima-Lei Macfarlane in Bellator, has some really high-profile fights in Bellator too. I remember she lost the Christina Williams fight right after the Ilima-Lei matchup, and that was a really hyped-up fight at the time for Bellator, so for Ducote, if you remember her as the fighter who was in Bellator, you might be kind of low on her right now, but I do feel like she has been able to improve since that time.
Yeah, if you look at it for Emily Ducote, I mean, she's beaten Juliana Lima, UFC vet. She's beaten Danielle Taylor, UFC vet, somebody that has a win over Jessica Penne, albeit years ago. But for me, this is the one key that you have to watch out for, because I think Jessica Penne, as an underdog, has a great shot. I think that Lupe Godinez is better than Emily Ducote, and I think Lupe Godinez beats her 8 out of 10 times. But again, I thought that Godinez beat Jessica Penne in that fight. It was a little bit of a non-starter, but when I do look at this fight, for Ducote, she's got upper volume. In a lot of her fights, it's a lot of double jab, triple jab, right hand, with a little bit of a leg kick. It's very, very low volume. There's a chance that Jessica Penne really wraps her up and gets ahead on the scorecards with just the accumulation of cage control time, which sounds insane, but the judges are weird these days. So I do like Emily Ducote because the best part of her game is she has this ring womanship about her where she really controls the aspects of the fight and where these fights have taken place, especially on this run where she's gone 5-1 since Bellator. So both of us in this matchup going with the younger fighter making her UFC debut in Emily Ducote. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Big time fights coming up. My personal favorite, Jourdain taking on Shane Burgos. You're not going to want to miss this. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.